Alright, we have three movies this week. Two movies that came out in theaters, and one that was merciful enough to not assault us with a theatrical release. But let's start with Jumanji: The Next Level, which is the second, third, or fourth Jumanji, depending on how you look at it. And this one is obviously the immediate follow-up to Welcome to the Jungle that came out this time of year a couple of years ago, which was inevitable because some people went into that movie, a lot of people went into that movie saying, like, why is this necessary? Why do we need this? And so on. With everything that everybody says about a familiar property getting a new movie. And then, sure enough, most people came out of it saying it was a big surprise, and everybody loved how likable the cast was and how well they worked together. It was a huge success. I think even a lot of critics took to it. And yeah, it was fine, to me anyway. But nothing that really like stood out and made me particularly excited for another one like this. But it did. These last two have started off in a way where they play with that new concept, where it's when they go inside the video game, but the concept being that each one of them has an avatar, which was a really cool idea for the last movie. And this one continues that. And I remember when it was immediately announced that there would be another one, I heard a lot of suggestions saying to switch it up a little bit, the next movie should be the same avatars, being Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Jack Black, and Karen Gillan, but have them each end up in a different one this time. So it's the same thing, but at the same time not at all, and it gives the four of them like different things to do, and they kind of get to play around being the different characters. And yeah, but not only did they take that approach in this one, but they added a couple of characters also, so now it's like really switched up. Adding in Alex Wolff's character having a grandfather played by Danny DeVito, and Danny DeVito having a friend and former business partner in Danny Glover, and now they're involved. With the only one remaining the same, at least at the start, is the girl, the girlfriend of Alex Wolff that ends up in Karen Gillan's body, and then everybody else is somebody different, particularly Danny DeVito and Danny Glover being The Rock and Kevin Hart. And, and so you can see where they're playing around with this, and it's not necessarily just... They knew going into this that they had to shake it up at least a little bit, and that's a good way to do it, by doing what people were hoping for and expected, but also changing it up even more by adding more characters. But it's also... Eventually you're going to kind of go into more of the same jokes once everything's established, once you kind of... Much like the movie before this, once the sort of gimmick of it kind of, you get used to it and it wears off, then it's like, okay, now what is the movie going to do that's new and fresh? And that's kind of where they stopped with the newness and the freshness. So, but you do have... I don't know how I feel with The Rock doing the Danny DeVito thing. I don't know how much that works. What does work immensely is Danny Glover being in Kevin Hart's body, hence Kevin Hart is playing the movie with an impression of Danny Glover. And I've criticized Kevin Hart a lot in the past. His stand-up is okay, but can be, that shrill thing, and then it's like, they take the worst aspects of his stand-up and say, do that for every movie character you've done. So I feel like I can say, with the utmost comfort, that this is by far the funniest I have ever found Kevin Hart throughout this movie. Like, I never got sick of him in this movie, because the way he plays Danny Glover just so calmly, and he's doing the voice, and he's so sensible, and he's, like, kind of rambling on about the... Because in the first movie, or the one before this, whatever you want to call it, it gets confusing. Fridge was him, and he was always, like, surprised when he knew stuff. And it's just the way that, as Danny Glover, he just kind of accepts that he knows stuff that he didn't before, and he just lets it kind of flow through him with him, and it's really good stuff, like, throughout the whole thing, and that's really great. And then we've got another plot going on here. It's just a random sort of stock villain. Like in the last one, it was Bobby Cannavale, who didn't really have to do it. It was a huge waste of him, where he was just kind of there, and it's pretty much the exact same sort of waste with Roy McCann is playing the villain now. in a story that really, quite honestly, doesn't matter. I don't think the writers thought it mattered either. It was more of what are the set pieces going to be like and the characters playing the different characters and all that, because we do eventually get to a point to where they can start switching bodies within the game. And it almost kind of feels like a cop-out, because it's like there's the great thing about starting this one is the fact that they've switched it up and they're playing different characters and all that, but this whole switching bodies thing, you can imagine they eventually reach the cop-out where it's like most likely they're going to end up in the bodies they were in before, and then it's just the first movie again. The only real difference being locations, with like obviously it's in the title, the jungle being the main setting of the one before this, and in this one it's much more desert, which, as you can imagine, is probably much less visually appealing. There's not much you can do with endless sand, unless you're David Lean or Anthony Manghel. And speaking of David Lean, yes, there are a couple of Lawrence of Arabia references, of all things. You know, because that's something this movie's target audience is going to get, where they play kind of like, it sounds a lot like the score. Like, you can tell they're trying to evoke the score as a little reference, but it's not quite there. That probably would have been copyright issues anyway if they even wanted to. But yeah, so that's about the most we get as far as any sort of like visual appeal here, because it's the same problem that I had in the other movie also, and I can't remember. I assume we had the same discussion when I talked about that one. The fact that the CGI looks really shoddy and animated, like especially all the animals. Like there's a whole herd of ostriches that keep coming back, and they just look so fake. And it's the whole thing of, well, they're inside a video game. Is it supposed to look fake or not, or is it just shoddy? And it's like, if you want to defend it with that and say maybe that's the point, then okay. But I mean, as far as like excitement and stakes go, it's not helping that at all. Because there are scenes that do really work, that feel genuinely like sort of classic video games. There's a great sequence involving like swinging bridges, but like a whole array of them in different places, and it looks exactly like an old classic video game would. And so that kind of stuff works for what little it's there, but for the most part it's them wandering around to various locations and running into characters and doing the same comedy bits we've seen them do before, until they eventually run into Aquafina, and it goes from there. She just kind of joins them. Like, they don't give her anything really spectacular to do that's not something everybody else is doing, so yeah, or that is what everybody else is doing. So, and then they find a way to bring in Nick Jonas and Colin Hanks back into it also, and it's like it's unclear to me about like the way, like how much of an option they have in regards to who their characters are, because in the first one they got to pick obviously, but in this one it's a point that they end up in the different bodies because they just get sucked in without doing that. So it's like, I don't know if Colin Hanks had the ability to be Nick Jonas again. I don't know. And then they kind of back themselves into a corner where eventually a horse is brought into this, where that's one of the options also. There's the four we know, and then obviously there's Nick Jonas, then there's Aquafina, and then there's a horse, which a couple of them get stuck with. And it's like, that's, I guess, funny on paper. It almost kind of evokes Donkey turning into a horse in Shrek 2. But it's like, in this case, since the horse doesn't talk, it's like, it sounds like a joke that's really good on paper, but then you realize as you go on that it's a joke you've now stuck yourself with. Like, you're just stuck with it, and you've got to work with this, and there's not a lot you can do with that. But God bless them, they kept going with it, and they stuck to it, even though, like I said, there's really not much you can do with it, and you can tell. And yeah, and just throughout, it ends up relying on a lot of the same jokes from the last one, like the Reese Darby character and the other NPCs that just, speak on a loop, or Kevin Hart's character, or Fridge, I guess specifically, being afraid of cake, because obviously he exploded in the first movie when he ate it. They bring that back a few times, and that's about it. So it's like you can see where they tried to switch it up a little bit, but at the end of the day, they not really. Like they did what they switched it up enough to get us hooked, and then it was like, well, now that we got that out of the way, here's the same shit again. So there it is. And then like as it goes on, also it does become like more boring and contrived as it goes, and once it gets involved in that story with Roy McCann, it's like, what does it matter? It even comes to like a really, the climaxes of this movie and the last one feel really similar also in structure and solution and everything. So there it is. The one thing that kind of stands out a little more that we didn't have in the other one was the backstory with Danny DeVito and Danny Glover, and like the ongoing thing that they have, and it's like they had a falling out and they kind of hate each other, but they're kind of reconciling, and the way this sort of brings them back together and all that. There's something nice in there. And Danny Glover just kind of has a warm presence that he often brings to shitty movies lately that like really comes through and makes you really wish he got to shine in better roles and better movies. But so yeah, I'm sure the audiences that really took to the last movie are gonna be just fine with this. And I don't hate it or anything, but it just kind of is, that same old thing. Once they change a few things here and there that are nice, but that's about the extent of it, at least to me. So, but more power to the people that want, just more of the same, because they're definitely gonna get it. So let's go on to Six Underground. Michael Bay's Netflix movie starring Ryan Reynolds. There's so much fucking wrong with that. All three things make me personally go, I don't know. Because obviously Netflix has been slowly winning us over from time to time. But for the most part, it's stuff like this. They are the new straight-to-video. They just happen to every now and then. As long as they're going for awards consideration, they'll put out something worthwhile. But there's obviously, you can still see in their downtime that they are doing what should just be straight-to-video shit. And it's weird to kind of say that about Michael Bay, because say what you will about Michael Bay, I know I've said plenty, but his movies are like, there is something, cinematic. Like they are, like Michael Bay makes like, I struggle to say like real movies, but I assume you get what I mean by this. Like sort of the opposite of this seemingly straight-to-video box. Like his movies are enormous. And there's something to take away from that. But here and I don't even think it's necessarily the Netflix thing. I think it's the style of the movie in general, because I say that about Michael Bay, and the thing is watching this, it felt a lot more like I was watching a Michael Bay knockoff rather than one of his actual movies. And it has that same old thing with you see in most straight-to-DVD action movies. There's a lot of flashing, there's a lot of jumbled timelines. It's literally one of those things where we see Ryan Reynolds like crashing in a plane, and then he actually does the let's go back thing, and then it reverses, and then we get a couple of action scenes that are in the past, and it takes 45 minutes for us to come back around to this moment. Because there's the whole like cutting and strobing and noise and all these attempts at excitement that you see in straight-to-DVD shit from directors that have no idea what the fuck they're doing. And it's like, Michael Bay has made a handful of, like, really good stuff. Like, I'll be a defender of the Bad Boys movies. Obviously, I love Pain and Gain. Most people love The Rock. It's like, he can do this. And it's like, I don't know what happened here. Because it's like all the traps of those straight-to-DVD directors you see that have no idea what the fuck's going on. And then it's like, it goes from like, like 4 years earlier, or however many years earlier. Sometimes it's, this happened 17 minutes ago, and it says that. and it's just this back and forth over and over again until we eventually get to this car chase. This car chase that's like the opening 20 minutes. I swear to God, after a while, I kind of thought this car chase was going to be the whole fucking movie. And that's not a good thing. This isn't fucking Fury Road by any means whatsoever. This is that choppy bullshit. The strobe effect and the constant editing and everything being way too damn close. The way he would, shoot most of the stuff in Transformers where you had no idea what the hell was going on because everything was just pushed in and it was like trying to fill the screen with all of its bullshit and you just can't decipher anything you're looking at whatsoever. That's this car chase that goes on and on and on and fucking on forever. It felt like a fucking eternity, this goddamn thing. And it's like, and yeah, it interrupts itself with like, Ryan Reynolds saying something funny and quippy or whatever the fuck. And obviously being Michael Bay, like the cool slow-mo. I can't put enough quotes on the cool there. And all that. And then it's like, we're cutting back and forth between some character bleeding out in giant close-up, and the car spinning around, and there's the strobe effect, and it's like it's trying so hard to, like, liven up this completely unexciting car chase that seems like it's intentionally trying to make it nauseating to look at. And I don't know what the effect could be with that. And it's like they're trying their hardest to make it seem brutal. Like you got the bleeding person in the backseat on top of the fact that I don't think I've ever seen so many flying bodies in a car chase before. In true Michael Bay fashion, I would say the last example will probably be Bad Boys 2. But yeah, every time a car crashes, the whole fucking thing just shatters and like dead bodies just fly out of it. And those are interesting enough visuals. It's something you don't typically see in big car chases. I guess he can have credit for that. But I mean, this is the Michael Bay action scenes in the way that when people often criticize him, this is like the worst of that stuff just all rolled into one never-ending scene. And of course you've got Ryan Reynolds at the center. And I know Ryan Reynolds is probably a big selling point for this movie, and I know people absolutely positively love him, but I've been saying the same thing for a number of years now, to the point that if you're see enough of the videos that I do, you're probably sick of hearing it at this point. But yeah, I am so fucking sick of Ryan Reynolds. I want to fucking puke. And like every now and then there's something. Like the first Deadpool was fresh enough until he completely ran it into the ground as much as he possibly could. But it's just the same damn thing it always is. It's no matter what scenario we're in, when it's not, yes, none saying fuck is pushed into this car chase at some point. It's just him doing his little Ryan Reynolds one-liners that are in every goddamn movie he's ever made. I haven't seen it since it came out, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's at least one hidden and buried. Like, it's relentless, him doing the exact same thing in every goddamn movie. And it's always that thing. It's the providing tepid commentary with a sarcastic tone. That's in every goddamn scenario. That's him, and it's so. And I can't understand how this has been appealing for like over a decade, but people love him. So good for them. But I can't fucking take this anymore, especially in a movie like this. Like, I go back to another, somebody who's, like, more known for, a sort of comedic background, when Michael Bay cast Krasinski in 13 Hours. And I've been heavily critical of Krasinski in that way because I've never bought him as, like, an action guy. But it's really, seeing Ryan Reynolds in this is really giving me appreciation for Krasinski in 13 Hours, because he did it totally straight-faced. Like, I don't buy him as an action guy at all, but he tried. And he's never tried to do the action thing while trying to do the gym thing at the same time. But Ryan Reynolds is, like, incapable of that. And I don't know that I can fully blame Ryan Reynolds, because I feel like this would have to stem from them, like, casting this movie because they wanted, like, you cast Ryan Reynolds because you want the Ryan Reynolds thing. Or, you know, he shows up for an action movie and he's directed to do the Ryan Reynolds thing. And it's like, so I don't know if it's him or the way he's, you know, being directed or what it is, but it's so fucking tired at this point. I don't know how this still works for people, but it does. So that's just where I stand with that. And of course, it's yet another movie that is constantly drowning itself out with an obnoxious, constant soundtrack. And constant soundtracks have their place. Obviously, Scorsese and Tarantino are at least two people that know this. But for the most part, unless you're like a legend in the business, the constant soundtrack is a dying art. And I think Suicide Squad may have been the final nail in its coffin. And this is just committing necrophilia at this point. I don't even know like over half the songs on this soundtrack, and it's like the whole 2 hours of movie is having songs in the background. I don't know. And so yeah, when it's not doing that, there's constant, and it's not just Ryan Reynolds. The whole thing is filled with people trying to be funny and doing their little things, which you see a lot in, you know, Michael Bay movies, especially his worst ones like the Transformers movies. There's always those characters that are there just to say their little funny lines, whether they're worthwhile or not. There's a whole character where there's a whole scene where he's devoted to just speaking in movie quotes regardless of the situation. Because this movie's not fucking lazy enough. And then there's the point in time where if the movie's terrified that somebody won't get an oh-so-clever reference that they make, so you have to call it out. So there's the point in time where Ryan Reynolds is trying to give a guy a pep talk. And this is at the point where we've already stretched out the whole, oh, the guy's speaking in movie quotes for some reason thing. By some reason, I mean no reason whatsoever. And he starts saying the first few lyrics of Lose Yourself. And it's like, oh, he's quoting Lose Yourself. That's funny, I guess. Not really. And then we have to have the guy in the passenger seat go, are you quoting Eminem? Because our audience won't get what you're saying unless I say that outright. So that's what we get for dialogue most of the time. Great. And there's a decent cast here that they are just wasting infinitely. Melanie Laurent is in this for some reason. I don't know why. I'm pretty sure she's the one bleeding in the back seat during the opening car chase, and then she's a major character throughout. So there's that. There's Ben Hardy, who played Roger in Bohemian Rhapsody. There's Corey Hawkins. It's a pretty decent cast. Corey Hawkins is the guy that they, you know, recruit and bring in. And it's an interesting concept while we're on this. It took me this long to even talk about the concept. That's how much shit is wrong with it just to start off with. But it's the idea of these people who only, their names are just numbers. It's like a numbers version of Reservoir Dogs, I guess. But they're all people who are, like, presumed dead or legally dead. But obviously they're not. And so they're this, yes, underground group, if you want the title, that go out and do these, you know, death-defying missions and all that. It's a decent concept. It's a decent concept for a Michael Bay movie. But, like I said, I don't know who the fuck this straight-to-DVD guy is posing as Michael Bay, but, there it is. There's the actress, I'm not sure of her name, but she plays Five. And this poor woman, with the dialogue she's saddled with, I feel like the writer was intentionally, like, she screwed the writers over at some point in their lives, and they're getting back at her by giving her the dialogue that she says, just to humiliate her as much as they possibly can. And that's just cruel. So, every now and then, it kind of somewhat resembles the better side of Michael Bay, and we get some moments every now and then. There's one moment that's really inspired, to their credit, where they use that THX sound effect that's at the beginning of a lot of movies, in, like, you just kind of have to see it. You really shouldn't see the movie, but as far as the way they use this, it's a pretty clever use of something like that, and kind of unexpected, so there is that. But really what this does is just continue to show us and teach us about the ups and downs of, like, the freedom of Netflix. because I was talking about Scorsese just a second ago with the constant soundtracks, and that obviously brings The Irishman into this also, where you see something like The Irishman and you just really appreciate that Netflix said, "Oh, nobody will fund you, Scorsese. Well, we'll fund you. Just do it. Like, just make the movie, and we will fund you." And it's like that. There is something really good about having a company like Netflix that'll go to directors and say, "Do what you want. You have the freedom to do whatever." And then sometimes we end up with stuff like this, and it's like it's. I guess we, just to balance it out, we have to take the good with the bad because that's how life works. So if we're gonna get stuff like The Irishman, we've got to live with the fact that stuff like this has to exist too, because that's the way it goes, I guess. And as it just goes on, I could hardly tell you what the damn plot is. It just goes from like I didn't care what was going on from one scene to the next. I don't think the movie did either. I don't know. You're not. It's almost like it's made to not be kept up with in that first hour or so, where they're just jumping around constantly, introducing and reintroducing the characters, and it's just noise and cutting and noise just over and over again, and just this movie is just a miserable experience all over. And like I said, thank whoever above that this did not get a theatrical release or it was not seen in theaters, because this would have been excruciating. I can only imagine. And eventually we get to a point, we get to a climax, and take this for what you will. It was a climax that had an eerie resemblance to Dwayne Johnson's Baywatch. Like, that's the first thing that came to mind. This movie made me remember something about Dwayne Johnson's Baywatch. I can't forgive it on that alone. So, there it is. And I know some people may dismiss this and say it's a Michael Bay movie. This is the kind of thing we're looking for. Well, I'm all for crazy ass, unleashed Michael Bay. That's definitely what Pain and Gain is. Pain and Gain, I feel like, is Michael Bay doing whatever the fuck he wants and making a really good product. I don't know what the fuck this shit is, but it can just go straight to hell. So, let's end on Richard Jewell, the annual Clint Eastwood movie. The annual true story Clint Eastwood movie. Another story that's pretty well worth telling, and it's like an important movie to exist solely to show the innocence of a guy that was I feel like I would have been like extremely young, like 5, but I feel like I vaguely remember seeing news stuff about this, where this dude was branded a potential suspect, this security guard in this bombing, because he found the bomb, and he had a reputation for being a bit overzealous in how much he wanted to go into law enforcement, and everything, just the kind of stars aligned against him, and like unfortunate coincidence after unfortunate coincidence, and all these things that make him look guilty as hell when he's anything but, and yeah, and eventually just proving his innocence until somebody finally, came forward and confessed, not just to this, but to multiple instances. And our main character is played by Paul Walter Hauser, I believe is his name. I'm pretty sure I don't have those reversed. And we saw him in I, Tonya, a movie I hated that he was probably the best thing in. And Black Klansman, of course, which was really funny, because one of the things that Sam Rockwell has to ask him just as a mandatory question is, have you ever been in the Ku Klux Klan? So, and yes, the movie starts off with him meeting Sam Rockwell, and in a totally different sort of environment. Like, they just happen to meet by chance. Like I said, there's so much interesting things here about the way the stars align, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the absolute worst. And they've kind of formed this unlikely friendship, and it's kind of is a really nice opening to sort of build this sort of relationship between them, that there's like, they're not extremely close, but for the both of them and at the place they are in their lives right now, it's close enough, and it's really nice and downplayed and really well done. And it basically shows, like, even at the start of their scenes together, that Richard is a character that is almost, despite his flaws and his sort of overzealous nature, he was almost too good to the people around him. That eventually it would be almost to a fault. And it's really good about sort of balancing that out, because you hear about the story, and you know Eastwood wants to get this dude's story out there so that people know the truth. You could imagine a movie that portrays him as like an absolute saint, but the way they balanced like the really sort of pure intentions that he had versus the sort of overzealous nature of him being a bit too aggressive sometimes, and particularly in these early scenes where, in between him being working at in Sam Rockwell's building and then being a security guard, he was like a cop on a college campus, and it was to the point that he was like pulling people over on the highway if he thought they were going to be bringing alcohol onto the campus, and it's like that is so not our jurisdiction, and ultimately gets him fired by his boss. Um, until he finally manages to get this security guard job where this bombing takes place in Centennial Park. And one of the stronger aspects of the movie is the stuff in between these scenes, which is his relationship with his mother, who is Kathy Bates, who is amazing in this, scoring that unexpected Golden Globe nomination. And there's a particular scene. There's one concert scene prior to the actual bombing scene, like a day or two before, and it's a Kenny Rogers concert. And there's a moment here where he takes his mom there because she wanted to see Kenny Rogers, and then while he's on the job, he like comes up behind her and they're like singing together, and it's just scenes like that that really show off their relationship and how kind of inseparable they are in this really great way, without making it seem like, it could make him seem pathetic because he's, a grown dude that lives with his mom and all that, and like it's the closest person that he's with, and he doesn't have like really anybody else in his life, it seems. Something that Olivia Wilde's character eventually uses against him. But I think they handled that well and made it, that really works in that context. But yeah, there is the Olivia Wilde character, the one that basically started it was the first one that released the big article that painted him as the prime suspect in this bombing itself. And yeah, I don't know a whole lot about this particular part of like the real thing, but there is the whole thing about, there is a scene when it's implied very, very strongly, like I don't even know if imply is the word, when she coerces John Hamm into sex to get him to say, because John Hamm is part of the FBI, and to get him to say that they're investigating Richard mainly. And Eastwood is being sued over this because that apparently did not happen, and it's the whole, because obviously she in real life died in like 2001, I want to say, and so it's like that company that's saying, this makes us and her look bad. And yeah, despite the character's intentions and setting this whole thing off, I can see this being extremely off-putting to people because of the irony of the whole movie's purpose being to clear the name of somebody who was smeared and was basically told everything that told the public that this guy was something that he wasn't. And it's for the movie to paint a character in such a way that didn't do the thing that makes her look bad. I can honestly see where that in itself, for some people, could destroy the integrity of the entire movie, because of just such the whole thing, the whole sort of, it's that ironic thing, the almost, some might say, hypocritical thing. And I totally would get that. But I do think that this movie is strong enough, and that's such a, I mean, I would say it's a small scene, but I mean, it does set off the entire chain of events. So I don't know, but the movie is like so well made, and the way it is so passionate and compassionate about its protagonist, that it's, I could see that happening for people, but it didn't happen for me. But I can acknowledge that there's parts of this that might be a little fucked up, given the movie's message. But to go on to Eastwood's like style of it, where there is a lot of criticism about how pretty much ever since Mystic River, if not before that, but I'm thinking Mystic River, Eastwood's movies have had a very similar look. They all start with that gray Warner Brothers logo, and it's like that's like when you go to a Woody Allen movie and it's the same style of credits every single time, and it's like you're kind of coming back and it's like revisiting somebody you already know. That's kind of how Eastwood's movies have come about in their similar style. And yeah, a lot of the times it can be like bland or it can seem like repetitive, and like Eastwood doesn't really have much of a inspired eye, as it were. But I think that the style really suits this movie really well. And like this, particularly those scenes at the park itself during the events are really well shot. It's also talking about the fact that I was like 5 when this came out. It is like it does make one feel old when you see like the Macarena being used as a period detail. It's like, yes, this is definitely 1996. I think it was. So yeah, so all of those scenes are really well done, and then the tension built up to when he finds the bag with the bombs in it, and then the build up to when it eventually goes off and all that. And there is a lot of tension in those scenes that's really well done, where it almost kind of has like a thriller feel to it. And I was kind of expecting or wondering going in if it was going to have like sort of vibes of like Patriots Day, which was my favorite movie of 2016 a few years ago. So that I would have been totally okay with that. And yeah, there's kind of something, at least in, those particular scenes, kind of something like that, and seeing, like, the gruesomeness of the aftermath and just how hard-hitting that stuff is. It does really work. And then, of course, eventually us following Richard as he goes into this downward spiral of everything starting to look against him. Even if he doesn't mean to, he can just say something or say something about himself that's just an innocent thing in any other context, but in this particular context, makes him look so incredibly guilty. Where it's like it's one thing to say, he was innocent, and it's such a shame that this happened. But at the same time, through the lens of the people investigating, it's like you can see how it got as far as it did. In certain cases, but this is also mainly me going off the movie. Also, like I said, I only know like the vague outline of the real stuff, so I don't know how many more liberties outside of the Olivia Wilde character were taken here. But as far as the movie goes, there's just a lot of things here. Whether it be the scene when he's talking about bombs at the dinner table, while one of the guys is wired. And he's just going into such great detail about what he knows about bombs. And then he's got like a whole sort of arsenal of like guns that he says he uses for hunting, but there are a lot of guns. There was an audible reaction in the theater I was in when we saw all the guns laid out on his bed, and he was just like, "What? They're just my guns." And it's like he was kind of oblivious to how bad a lot of this looked. And so and then there's the moments where Rockwell's character just gets who's like really really damn good in this, by the way. The whole cast is really good, but Rockwell is especially a standout apart from Hauser himself. But this scene where Rockwell says like, the FBI is going to be here, they're going to be looking around. Whatever you do, don't say anything. Do not talk whatsoever at all. And John Hamm comes through the door, and the first thing he does is just start talking. It's like, and it goes on to his almost weird fixation on law enforcement is the absolute, top thing. Like, no matter what happens, I want to be one of them, and they are like practically gods, and I must. And it just becomes this thing that just keeps digging him into a hole, especially with how much the John Hamm character is out to get him, which he is kind of taking personally because of the whole fact that Hamm's character is there when the bomb went off, and it's like it's something that he feels like he should have been able to prevent. So it's like so Ham's character is like truly invested in finding like it doesn't feel so much like he's an antagonist in the story and he's going after Richard with all he's got just because it's like because he genuinely wants the person that did that. So and because you kind of get the sense they don't really go into this with his character, and they do. If there is one fault of the movie, it may be that they make Ham a little out too much to be like just a sort of two-dimensional, one or two-dimensional antagonist. But that he's clearly in this position because he has the same drive that Richard does about how, like when at the very beginning when Rockwell asks Richard why he's so passionate about becoming a cop, and he's like, because I believe in protecting people, and that's it. That's like his whole sort of thing that gets him as passionate as he does, and ultimately into this situation. And it's so in all those scenes when they're interrogating him and just really good, intense stuff without being too overblown at all. I especially love the moments like I was talking about the Rockwell scenes and him being his lawyer. I love John Hamm's line when he first gets a call from Rockwell and he says, "Well, you've got a loud lawyer. Congratulations." And stuff like that. But of course, the heart of the movie is Hauser as Richard Jewell, and he is he's obviously shown that he's a good sort of supporting actor on the side here, but now here, directly in the center of a movie like this, he's so damn good. Like, oh my god, he's so good. Because there's so many things. Because we believe, like, whenever he does something that can be frustrating, particularly for Rockwell, when he just keeps digging his hole and making himself look more and more guilty, while trying to prove his innocence, he's just making it worse. We believe, like, he doesn't just come off as, like, necessarily some idiot. He comes off like somebody that is just, he's like we were saying, he's passionate to a fault, unfortunately. Like, and sometimes he may, be too much about seeing, trying to do the right thing or whatever. But it always comes across as sincere, and like he's doing it for a purpose that he strongly believes in. That is a pure intention. And there's even there's a magnificent scene when Rockwell just blows his top yet again, and this time it's because Richard is not acting angry despite all this, and then Richard finally gets his own blow up scene. But it's like it's this interesting case of when you see a character blow up, you kind of feel an actor saying, "This is the big, this is my Oscar clip," but it's like the way he has to play Richard. It's like he does blow up, but you can sense the reluctance in it, and the fact that he's saying, like I'm not blowing up because I'm not that guy. It's a really strong scene. And there's a lot of scenes like that are much more downplayed that he has throughout the movie. There's the shot of him when he gets so excited about the fact that Tom Brokaw is on the news talking about him. And it's even like there's something kind of clever they do where it's like I'm pretty sure they're playing real news footage of him, like when he's talking to Katie Couric, but we get just enough of an angle of, like, the camera's at just an angle of it to where it could believably be the real him or Hauser, but I'm pretty sure it's a clip of real him, but the way the camera's angled, you can't quite tell. So I thought that was really well done, but yeah, and then he gets, he sees Tom Brokaw talking about him, and it's the greatest thing ever, and then when he's painted as a suspect and Tom Brokaw's, like, talking shit on him, it's like the worst thing that's ever happened to him, and he just kind of does it with like a look, like his world is shattered because Tom Brokaw thinks he's guilty. And yeah, and the way they handle all that stuff, like I said, there's a lot of stuff where they could have made missteps or they could have made it too heavy-handed, but they don't. A lot of it is downplayed just enough, and the big blow-ups happen when they need to. And it's really well done. I really got a lot out of this one, so yeah, so I think that's going to be it for this one. The next video is going to be exhausting. We have Star Wars, we have cats, We have Bombshell. We have The Two Popes. We have Togo, the Willem Dafoe movie on Disney Plus, and I think The Aeronauts is supposed to get like a streaming release, like on Amazon or something. Uh, so something like that. So that's 5 or 6 for next week, and so there's that. And I'm gonna keep doing the Christmas thing for a while. I might try to throw verses in there also. There's one in particular that I want to do. So probably at least before New Year's. So all of that stuff packed into the second half of this month. So until all of that, I think that's going to be it for this.